The area of study focusing on the connection between genetics and personality is often called behavioral genetics. Allport was one of the first to suggest that inherited factors shape personality and that they rank in importance with environmental factors. Let us now consider another researcher who pursued this causal connection between genetic inheritance and personality. Over the course of his career, Hans Eysenck published an amazing 79 books, including some for the general public, and an equally amazing 1,097 journal articles. At the time of his death, he was the world's most frequently cited psychologist. Unfortunately, when he died, his wife destroyed all of his personal and professional papers. He developed several personality assessment devices, including the Eysenck Personality Inventory, the Eysenck Personality Profiler, the Maudsley Medical Questionnaire, and the Maudsley Personality Inventory. His work has been pivotal in supporting the role of inheritance in personality and in integrating the scientific study of personality into psychology. Eysenck and others have used factor analysis to identify traits, that is, relatively permanent dispositions of people. Eysenck developed a factor theory, much like McCrae and Costa's five-factor theory, and we'll look at McCrae and Costa's theory more closely in week 8. Eysenck extracted only 3 general superfactors, which yielded 3 general bipolar factors or types: extroversion, introversion, neuroticism, stability, and psychoticism, superego. Hans J. Eysenck was born in Berlin in 1916, but as a teenager he moved to London to escape Nazi tyranny. Eysenck was trained at the psychometrically oriented psychology department of the University of London, from which he received a bachelor's degree in 1938 and a PhD in 1940. Eysenck actually wanted to study physics at the University of London, but was told that he lacked the requisite academic background. Greatly discouraged, he asked university officials if there was any other science in which he could major. As Eysenck recalled, "I was told there was always psychology. What on earth is that?" I inquired in my ignorance. "You'll like it," they said. So I enrolled in a subject whose scientific status was perhaps a little more questionable than my advisors realized. Well, more than 40 years later, the highly successful and productive Eysenck was asked if he had ever regretted his career choice. "Often," he replied, but admitted that he was resigned to it. Eysenck perhaps was the most prolific writer in the world, and his books and articles often stirred worldwide controversy. He served as professor emeritus at the University of London until his death from cancer on September 4th, 1997. Eysenck and his second wife, Sybil, who also had a PhD from the University of London, together developed many of the questionnaires used in their research. Eysenck often noted that although published in joint names, his work was largely a monument to her skill, patience, and endurance. Few scientists in any discipline have been so straightforward in acknowledging the research contributions of their spouses. The personality theory of Hans Eysenck has strong psychometric and biological components. However, Eysenck contended that psychometric sophistication alone is not sufficient to measure the structure of human personality, and that personality dimensions arrived at through factor analytic methods are sterile and meaningless unless they have been shown to possess a biological existence. With these assumptions in mind, Eysenck listed 4 criteria for identifying a factor. First, it must be based on strong psychometric evidence. A second criterion is that the factor must also possess heritability and fit an acceptable genetic model. Third, the factor must make sense from a theoretical view. The final criterion for the existence of a factor is that it must possess social relevance. According to Eysenck's model, personality is organized hierarchically. I've constructed a diagram of behavioral organization from lowest to highest to show you. A hierarchical model such as Eysenck's suggests strong relationships between one level of the hierarchy and the next. Specific behaviors or acts derive from habits, which derive from traits, which derive from types or superfactors. Thus, taken together, the theory suggests that any specific behavior that an individual performs can ultimately be traced back to the individual's personality type. Such a conceptualization grants significant power to the type variables within an individual's personality in terms of determining the specific behaviors in which that individual will engage. An example of an act would be buying food. A habit would be regularly buying food for a party. The trait would be the individual has parties frequently and is often seen with groups of people. And that leads us ultimately to the superfactor. This individual is on the extrovert side of the extroversion-introversion continuum. Although many dimensional models exist, Eysink's methods of measuring personality limited the number of bipolar personality types to only 3, sometimes referred to as the Penn model: extroversion, neuroticism, and psychoticism. Although he did not rule out the possibility that further dimensions may be added later. All 3 are bipolar, and all the superfactors are on a spectrum, with extroversion being at one end of factor E and introversion occupying the opposite pole. Similarly, factor N includes neuroticism at one end and stability at the other, and factor P has psychoticism at one pole and the superego function at the other. Eysenck believed everyone exists somewhere on the spectrum of all 3 personality dimensions, and he argued that where people are on the spectrum is determined by heredity. Now, Eysenck also provided descriptions of each of the 3 dimensions. Individuals high in extroversion are characterized by sociability, impulsiveness, liveliness, optimism, and other traits indicative of people who are rewarded for their association with others. They like to be around people. Introverts are quiet, passive, unsociable, careful, reserved, thoughtful, and controlled. Eysenck believed the principal difference between extroverts and introverts is one of cortical arousal. Like extroversion and introversion, neuroticism stability is largely influenced by genetic factors. Those high in neuroticism have a tendency to overreact emotionally and have difficulty returning to a normal state after emotional arousal. Eysenck accepted the diathesis stress model of psychiatric illness, which suggests that some people are vulnerable to illness because they either have a genetic or have an acquired weakness that predisposes them to an illness. This predisposition, the diathesis, may interact with stress to produce a neurotic disorder. Like extroversion and neuroticism, P is a bipolar factor. High psychotic scores indicate egocentrism, nonconformance, aggression, impulsiveness, hostility, and obsessive-compulsive disorders. People low on psychoticism, in the direction of the superego, tend to be altruistic, highly socialized, empathic, caring, cooperative, conforming, and conventional. The Penn model doesn't just describe the 3 dimensions, but further attempts to provide causal explanations of personality. The Penn model looks for psychophysiological, hormonal, and other biological mechanisms responsible for the personality dimensions, so that the theory can be tested by scientific experiments. Eysenck provides a biological explanation of extroversion in terms of cortical arousal in the brain via the ascending reticular activating system. Activity in this system stimulates the cerebral cortex, which in turn leads to higher cortical arousal. Cortical arousal can be measured by skin conductance, brain waves, or sweating. Introverts are characterized by higher levels of activity than extroverts, and so are chronically more cortically aroused than extroverts. So introverts are less tolerant of higher levels of stimulation that would occur at parties and other social gatherings. Eysenck also explains neuroticism in terms of activation in the sympathetic nervous system or limbic system. The limbic system consists of the hippocampus, amygdala, septum, and hypothalamus, and regulates such emotional states such as sex, fear, and aggression. It is responsible for the fight or flight response in the face of danger. Heart rate, blood pressure, skin conductance, sweating, breathing rate, and muscular tension in the forehead can measure activation levels of the limbic system. Neurotic individuals have greater activation levels and lower thresholds within the limbic system. They are easily upset in the face of very minor stresses. However, emotionally stable people are calm under such stresses because they have lesser activation levels and higher thresholds. There is strong empirical evidence that neuroticism indeed has a strong influence on psychological distress. Researchers have found that temperamental dispositions seem more powerful than environmental factors in predicting psychological distress, and that neuroticism is a powerful determinant of high psychological distress. Eysenck also provides a biological explanation of psychoticism in terms of gonadal hormones such as testosterone and enzymes such as monoamine oxidase, MAO. Although there has not been a lot of research done on psychoticism in comparison with extroversion and neuroticism, the current research shows that people who show a psychotic episode have increased testosterone levels and low MAO levels. Impulsivity and aggressiveness were negatively correlated with MAO, which plays a role in the degradation of neurotransmitters, norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin. Eysenck suggested that low MAO activity may be a marker for vulnerability. Eysenck evolved 4 personality inventories that measure his superfactors. The first, the Maudsley Personality Inventory, or MPI, assessed only E and N and yielded some correlation between these two factors. For this reason, Eysenck developed another test, the Eysenck Personality Inventory, or EPI. The EPI contains a lie scale to detect faking, but more importantly, it measures extroversion and neuroticism independently, with a near zero correlation between E and N. The EPI was still a 2-factor inventory, so consequently Hans and Sybil Eysenck published a third personality test, namely the Eysenck Personality Questionnaire, EPQ, which included a psychoticism, or P scale. Subsequent criticisms of the P scale led to yet another revision, the Eysenck Personality Questionnaire Revised. Eysenck believed that P, E, and N all have powerful biological determinants, and he cited as evidence the existence of these 3 biological components in a wide variety of cultures and languages. Researchers have found identical factors among people in various parts of the world. Evidence suggests that individuals maintain their position over time on the different personality dimensions, and research on twins suggests strong similarities on these dimensions, which is evidence of a strong hereditary component. Eysenck's complex model of personality suggests that the psychometric traits of P, E, and N can combine with one another and with genetic determinants, biological intermediates, and experimental studies to predict a variety of social behaviors, including those that contribute to disease. For many years, Eysenck researched the relationship between personality factors and disease. According to this research, people with a helpless, hopeless attitude are more likely to die from cancer, whereas people who react to their illness with anger and emotional arousal are much more likely to die from cardiovascular disease. Now, these findings do not prove that psychological factors cause disease, but they may interact with other factors to create risk. The factor theories of Eysenck and others rate high on parsimony and on their ability to generate research, and on their usefulness in organizing data. They are about average on falsifiability and internal consistency. Also, the theories are rated low on the usefulness to the practitioner. Let's look at Isink's concept of humanity. On the determinism versus free choice dimension, Isink's theory sides somewhat toward the deterministic view, but only slightly. Regarding optimism versus pessimism, Isink is mostly silent. But on teleology versus causality, he comes down on the side of causality. On the question of conscious versus unconscious determinants of behavior, Isink's approach leans toward unconscious determinants insofar as people are mostly incapable of being aware of how genetics and brain processes affect their behavior and personality. Regarding the issue of biological versus social influences, it may be somewhat surprising to say, but in fact, Isink very much argued for both nature and nurture. On the dimension of individual differences versus similarities, biological theory leans quite a bit toward individual differences. Biological, brain, and genetic differences focus on the uniqueness of individuals.